Good evening, everyone. This is David Mandel at Ohel Children's Home and Family Services. Thank everyone for joining us for this discussion this evening. One Heart, Two Homes, offering tools and comfort for community in crisis. We certainly would prefer to be discussing many other issues this evening other than the topic at hand of the very difficult circumstance for millions and millions of individuals living in Israel and actually around the world, for so many Israelis that are not home and so many Americans and Anglos that are in Israel looking to get home. Our conversation will focus this evening by Dr. Norman Blumenthal, Ellie Rothstein, and Naomi Baum, who I will be introducing. One Heart, Two Homes, coping together while our loved ones remain in Israel. We would like to thank Sivi Ryder, Ohel's Director of Children and Trauma Services, and Cheryl Shanowski, Coordinator of Trauma Services, for organizing this conversation relatively quickly. We are looking to offer practical guidance, emotional support, and expert insight from a number of individuals. Dr. Norman Blumenthal, Ohel's Director of Trauma Services, Zachter Family National Trauma Center, Ellie Rothstein, Chief Executive Officer of Kav L'Noar in Israel, and Dr. Naomi Baum, psychologist in private practice in Israel and an expert in trauma and resilience. We're going to begin with our colleague, Dr. Norman Blumenthal, and following a discussion by each of the three panelists, we will have a question and answer conversation on items they mentioned, as well as questions that you may be asking on the chat. We have hundreds of individuals joining us this evening, listening in, participating. We invite you to ask your question on the chat that we will see. And following the webinar this evening, we invite you to stay for a moment or two, literally a brief moment, and complete an evaluation. It helps us understand how we can carry forward this and other conversations. Let us begin with our colleague, Dr. Norman Blumenthal, Ohel's Director of the Zachter Family National Trauma Center. Dr. Blumenthal, thank you very much for joining us.
Okay, thank you very much, David. And thank you and Ohel's board that makes it possible for me and for the rest of our team to provide these kind of services. I'm a bit self-conscious presenting in the presence of Naomi Baum, who was a long friend and colleague, and Ellie, Ellie Rothstein, who I've gotten to know more recently, not only because of their distinct levels of expertise, but they're living it. They're right now here in the States, but they're living it in Israel. And it's a very different experience. And I have to admit that within Ohel, there was some ambivalence about my part of this conversation, because I'm talking about the struggles for people here in the States, and it pales in comparison to the challenges for those who are there in Israel. And so I begin sort of with an apology and an awareness that some of the topics that I'm going to be talking about may seem almost petty and picayune by comparison, but since our audience is here in America, we felt compelled to do so. There's several situations, and I'm really going to be just touching upon them in the few minutes I have and try to give some practical advice, but please do provide questions so we can go and touch on the areas in more detail. Obviously, part of it is the natural concern and worry for Israel itself and for our privileges in Israel. Our fates are intertwined, and we know that. And it's always, in some respects, more scary when you're far away. For several reasons. You don't have control over the situation. And it's certainly in the nature of the media to highlight some of the more scary events. And therefore, you sometimes get a very skewed picture of what is actually going on there. And we don't have control. I mean, one of the benefits that Israel has is that they are fighting back and that they are actively participating in the war. And we are sort of more passive bystanders, which in some respects makes that more difficult. Many participants and many people here, based on the phone calls that I've gotten already, have children who are either living in Israel or studying for a year or several years in Israel. And this is just the time when they would be coming back. So there's certainly, again, the plans have been uprooted, and there's worry about their well-being. And we know naturally that teens and young adults sometimes take more risks than people who are older, and worrying about whether they're taking the necessary precautions in terms of being in the mamad, taking cover when there are attacks. In terms of those kind of issues, and again, we have to remember that the people we're talking about, the children we're talking about, have sort of just left childhood. And sometimes when we feel that they're in a precarious situation, we very easily regress and want to talk to them as if they were younger, but to recognize that they're now independent adults. And if they're studying there for a year or two, they're also now developing that independence. And if we want to communicate with them any of our concerns, or if we want to convey a message that they should take the proper precautions, we have to do so recognizing they're independent adults, saying so in a matter-of-fact manner, and saying so in a fashion that it's advice, not necessarily parents ordering them what they should do. And of course, there's also the unknown. Well, they're going to be coming home. If they're not coming home, where are they going to stay? Is the seminary or the yeshiva going to keep them? Are there relatives who will house them? And all that may have to be arranged with all that uncertainty. And we know that uncertainty, I know that Dr. Baum will be talking more about anxiety, but uncertainty breeds a whole lot of anxiety. Many calls I've gotten were from homes where parents are away, or one parent is away. And some instances, grandparents are watching grandchildren, which as a grandparent, I can tell you, is about tolerable for about 3 hours. But suddenly that week visit is becoming maybe prolonged. And the children, of course, are tense and worried because the parents are not coming home when they're supposed to, or it could be a sibling who's in Israel not coming back when they're supposed to. So again, we have to remind you that kids, especially younger kids, will express fear in many different ways, including misbehavior. And sometimes children, very typically, especially younger children, will present their concerns in spurts. They'll come with a fear and you'll try to talk to them, and then suddenly they seem okay. And by the way, usually those spurts occur in about 2 o'clock in the morning, but they'll come to you with their concerns and their fears and then sort of withdraw. It's probably a good idea, especially if it's parents or a parent, that there is video contact, that there are video calls, but not to overdo that either, because that could be seen as sort of a tease, as if to make believe that the parent is still there. Maybe it could be too much of a reminder of their absence. So intermittent and periodic video calls to show the children that the adult is okay, the parent is okay, is fine. Maintain their routine. Very important. Children are comforted by routine, especially younger children. And therefore, as much as possible, now this, of course, is, again, complicated by the fact that we're in that sort of netherland of between the end of school and the beginning of camp when there is no routine. But as much as possible, then have a day planned. Let them know this tomorrow we're doing this, tomorrow we're doing that. Let them have children thrive on predictability and routine, especially when their predictability has been sabotaged. Remember as well with children that your voice tone and body language is often as important as the content of what you talk about. So if you're scared and if you're trying to assure them of their loved one's safety and there's a quiver in your voice, they'll hear that much more than the words. So make sure, again, and using the old metaphor of putting the oxygen on yourself before you put on your child, make sure you're okay before you sort of try to calm your children. Also, again, a reminder that we often emphasize on these webinars that we live in the age of technology. Children know everything. We're not insulating children from much. And even if they're not regularly on the internet, if you're more cautious in terms of how much you allow children to access the internet, it's in the culture of childhood that they feel entitled to know as a result of technology. So we're going to tell them that there is a war, and you're going to tell them that there is some element of danger, but of course we're not going to try to avoid any kind of distortions, and tell them that, you know, the parent or the sibling is not on the front, and the parent and the sibling is taking the necessary precautions to be safe. So try to give them a proportionate sense of what's happening, but we don't try to hide anything from them, because then if they hear it from a friend, or if they overhear parent conversations, which of course children tend to do, then it gets even more scary because if you're hiding something, then there must be something very dangerous going on. For some of the older children, and these are themes we've emphasized before, try to put what's going on in the broader context. There's a lot of research that shows that children who are aware of their family history, of their nation's history, have more resilience than those who don't. And this is a very big story. Our battle with those who wish to destroy us did not begin in 2025. And when you put it in the broader perspective, it can very well make it sort of diluted and make it a broader situation and not one that is as sudden. And again, as I mentioned earlier, it's hard when you're passive. It's hard when you're not active. And give your children and yourself whatever you can do, whether that's prayer, whether it's volunteering for Israel, whether it's good deeds or kind deeds that in the spirit of and the merit of the well-being of Israel, all that is both probably good for the country as well, but it also helps alleviate some of that anxiety and worry. The other thing is also keep the perspective, and this is delicate and probably more for teenagers than for younger children, but there's some very impressive victories taking place. Some incredible feats that have been accomplished by the Mossad, by Israeli Air Force, and I think that can balance some of the worry. Yes, we wish it could all happen without any fatalities, without any injuries, and that is terribly tragic. But again, especially for the adolescent who can hold on to many different kinds of even seemingly contradictory emotions and perceptions, make sure it's balanced with both the ache and the pain for those who are suffering, for those who are hurt, with the pride in terms of remarkable accomplishments of the only Jewish country in the world. Access news judiciously, allow your children to do the same. I know we're very concerned, but hearing too much of the news and knowing as well that in today's day and age, when many news services are competing for our attention, that the more sensational they can be, the more they will grab our attention, that we have to be aware of the sources of information, where we're getting it from, and not to overdose on news, but to be informed as well. Know your child. Some children are more prone to anxiety than others. Some children are more oblivious. And again, to the extent that your child is prone to anxiety, that's how you're going to be intervening more, or for that matter, even the child who may be too oblivious, it might be important to teach them that when something like this is going on, they need to be aware and they need to govern their behaviors appropriately. We're on the brink of summer, and the summer is a time for recreation and fun. And the question that I've gotten asked is, do I let my child go to the amusement park, to the beach, to do these fun activities when there is a period that we're struggling? And again, kids need to have fun. But maybe one thing, maybe tone it down a bit, was to teach our children that when there's hardship and threats and danger, that we don't just go on with life as normal, but we don't remove all recreation and fun and play. For those children who had plans, and many children had plans to be in Israel this summer, their plans are aborted. And this can be very distressing to them. And we might say, again, by comparison, how can we compare that to those who are stuck under rubble or facing these kind of missiles? But for that child, that is a mishap. And we can validate it, although we can teach them as well that, again, even though that's distressing, it doesn't compare to what might be going on in Israel. And so they can learn to be more empathic. But it's also a teachable moment. I was thinking about it, over the last 6 years, we've had several events that have rerouted our plans. We had COVID, and so many plans were aborted because of COVID. I have a grandson who had an online bar mitzvah because of COVID. So much school and so many plans and summer vacations were ended because of COVID. Then we had October 7th, where again, it seemed like everything we had anticipated and planned changed. The rise of anti-Semitism, those kids who had planned to go to Ivy League schools, to Columbia, to Harvard, now changing their plans because it's not a hospitable place for them to be. So this is maybe an opportunity for us to teach our children and teach ourselves that we're not running the world and that we can plan and plan. And sometimes, as the old saying goes, man plans, God laughs. And it's a very good time for us to learn that very important lesson. And by the way, just one more point, and then I'll conclude because I see I'm a little bit over on my time. What's interesting about what's going on now is that we're going on 2 years. If we date this back to October 7th, we're not used to that. Again, the wars in Israel, and again, I'm not minimizing the tragedy and the loss of life, but most of them are over pretty quickly. This has been lingering. And there's a very big difference, and maybe some of the other panelists will discuss this as well. There's a very big difference between a short-term, sudden, horrific trauma versus a trauma that endures and perpetuates. And this has been, what's going on now is a trauma that's not letting up. And the difference really is, and again, I'll regel achat, and just very quickly, is that a sudden trauma, we may be affected by it and we may grow from it, but our efforts are try to retrieve and reclaim the life and the world we had before this horrific event occurred. When the trauma is prolonged, we actually change ourselves and we change our perspective. And I think there's a certain, this is wearing on, and I think it's affecting us, and maybe even more so in Israel, and I'd be curious to hear that this is not just something that we have to endure and then try to reclaim the life we had, but I think we're being, in some significant way, and maybe permanently changed by the length of time that we've been in this situation. So I raise that as an issue for us to think and to consider, and perhaps will be discussed more effectively by my fellow panelists. Okay, thank you.
Dr. Baum, I will come to you in a moment. Dr. Blumenthal speaks about anxiety and uncertainty. Anxiety and uncertainty, as we're speaking right now, there are missiles once again raining down in Israel. It's 4 o'clock in the morning there, which means for so many nights and maybe weeks and months, as Dr. Blumenthal spoke about 2 years, certainly since Thursday night, there's been very little sleep that anyone has had in Israel, irrespective of the age that you are, and keeping in mind that there are hundreds of thousands of Israelis in the reserves, which means that spouses with little children are home alone, going into the mamad in your apartment house, in your house, or going down to the basement. The anxiety and uncertainty is beyond understanding. Dr. Blumenthal emphasized if the child is showing anxiety, don't feed into it. As an example, don't overdo on phone calls or FaceTime. Your voice and body may show even more than your words. Resilience begets resilience. Balance your comments of the difficult and the frightening also with positive thoughts. Dr. Baum is a colleague who has a private practice in Israel in Efrat and is an Israeli and international recognized expert in trauma. Also, the publisher with Tzivi Ryder, Ohel's director of Children and Trauma Services, of booklets called In a Space, a Resilience Workbook, which after October 8th was translated into Ivrit and we've had the distribution of tens of thousands under the Kestenbaum Family International Children's Services throughout the North, Central, and South Israel. Dr. Baum, it's a privilege that you're joining us this evening. Thank you.
Unmute. Okay, good evening. So I am talking to you from upstate New York. I do make my home in Israel, and I don't know whether it's serendipity, chance, I tend to think it's Yad Hashem. We arrived in the United States on Wednesday morning to do some work at camp and then have a vacation. And here we are in this beautiful surroundings, as calm and as peaceful as can be. And all of our children, 7 families with many grandchildren, are all in Israel. And of course, that hasn't been easy. That hasn't been easy at all. So I appreciate being here and being on U.S. time and being able to participate in this webinar. And I want to talk about both resilience and anxiety. Generally, I talk about resilience. And when we talk about resilience, what we're talking about is not the absence of distress, but the ability to endure, to adapt ourselves, to endure, to find meaning, and to grow even in the face of profound stress and distress. Resilience is not a fixed kind of thing. It's a dynamic process, and you can work on your own resilience. And in the resilience workbook that Tzivi Reiter and myself wrote, and that has been distributed widely in Israel and very warmly accepted, we try to teach children some of the things that they can do to help themselves. And one of the things is really talking about their feelings. And we're going to talk a little bit about that anxiety that is so prevalent for many of us. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But I think what we always need to understand is that connecting to people, staying connected to people, and remembering what our purpose is, why we're fighting this war, go a long way to creating that resilience. The third element of resilience that we need to really consider is flexibility. And Dr. Blumenthal talked about how people have to change their plans. And during Corona, we used the words, during COVID, in Israel, we called it Corona. During COVID, we used that word pivot. We learned how to pivot. Pivoting is a sign of flexibility. And here, people are making all sorts of pivots and changing plans. Ellie Rothstein, our co-panelist, is going to talk to you maybe about his changing plans, but figuring out how to adapt to the situation and adapt effectively is very important, a very important capability. And I think in Israel, we have adapted and learned how to do that well. Just as an anecdote, my kids today, the kids are off of school, the parents are off of work. So my kids decided to get together today in Israel, in Efrat, in my home, where I am not there, and have a pizza party. So they sent me tons of pictures from all of them having a great time on the grass. The grass is right next to the shelter, but they were hanging out and having a good time. And that's sort of like making lemonade out of lemons. But let's go back and talk for a few moments about anxiety, because I think a lot of us here, I know a lot of the people in this webinar have family members in Israel. The family members may be students, they may be soldiers. And certainly if everybody's anxious about their kids, but those parents who have children who are serving in the IDF, or even grandparents who have grandchildren serving in the IDF, have another layer of anxiety. And what does that mean when anxiety has actually made itself at home in our bodies, in our thoughts, in our daily routines? I think we have to remember that we are living in historic times. I believe that we will look back upon these days, God willing, and tell a tale of where we were, what happened to us both individually and as a people. These are really historic times. The war is an epic war, but it is a war, and war-related anxiety is real. It doesn't only affect soldiers on the front lines, it touches everyone. Families of soldiers, civilians living under threat, people watching the news from afar, and even children, of course, who may not understand all the details, but soak up the tension in the air. So let's talk a little bit about what this war-related anxiety is all about. When we live under ongoing threat, and in Israel, this ongoing threat, as Norman mentioned, has really been ongoing for 2 years. But I would say, considering these 2 years, there have been peaks and valleys, or maybe not valleys, but there have been peaks. And then there have been plains, and then peaks again and planes. So we have had various times where the anxiety gets stronger, and then you adapt again, and then it gets stronger. But now what's happening, this war is nothing like what has happened before. Nothing really like what has happened before. And what happens is that anxiety affects us in our bodies. Our heart races, our muscles become tense. We're not sleeping well. We often wake up in the middle of the night and can't fall back to sleep. You may be on edge. I was sitting here in Sugar Grove, Pennsylvania this afternoon doing a session with counselors, and all of a sudden I jumped. I heard what I thought was a siren. It was like that tone, that sound, and that was like an automatic response. And that's what happens when you live in a war zone for a long time. You begin to live on the edge. So when our fight-flight system is activated again and again, our bodies become tired, we become emotionally tired. But it's important to say that this is not a weakness. This is the way it is. It's a sign that you're human. But there are things that we can do to help ourselves. And one of the things that I want to talk about is reaching out, not experiencing this alone. I think one of the things we've learned over and over again in the field of resilience is the way to help ourselves best is to be a part of community. And if you don't have a naturally occurring community, reach out and find one. Don't be in this alone. If you have a child who's serving in the IDF, find other parents whose kids are serving, so that you can talk to each other and support each other and share both your feelings and what you do to help yourselves. If you have children in Israel, there are groups, but also it doesn't have to necessarily be a group of parents, other parents who have kids in Israel. It can be a group through the synagogue. It can be a group in the neighborhood. Get out there, do things, do good deeds. When you go out and you volunteer, you take control over your lives. One of the things that anxiety breeds or breeds anxiety is a sense of lack of control. We don't control when those missiles are coming. We feel helpless in the face of those missiles, particularly when we're over here, but also when we're over there and the missiles are coming, then we feel a real threat on our lives and you feel out of control. So you've got to do as much as you can to gain a sense of control, and being connected with community, volunteering, reaching out, not being alone is really the way to go. You can feel useful and productive with the added benefit of being with others, not suffering alone. So whether it's preparing food for families of soldiers in Israel, visiting people who can't get out, going, whatever chesed you find makes us both feel good and feel in control and not be alone. Another way to cope, another important avenue of coping is our physical body. And people often talk about breathing. However, I find personally, when I'm anxious, it's very hard to sit and breathe. So there are a lot of breathing techniques, and we could try and breathe together, which I don't think we're going to have time to do right now. And that may work for you. It doesn't usually work if you're feeling highly anxious. What does work is physical exercise and movement. Get out there, walk, jog, run, dance, bicycle, swim, do something to move, and this will help discharge some of your nervous energy. One of the things that I've been doing over the last number of years is teaching Qigong, which is a form of meditative movement. It combines both moving the body and breathing. And I find that is a very effective way for many people to feel more in control of their body, to discharge some of that nervous energy, to move and to breathe. So take into account your physical body. That is really important. A third item of importance is news. How much media are we taking in and how much we control that? Now, almost inevitably, the first day or two, you are going to be glued. If you're like me, and if you're like many people, you will be glued, just glued to your cell phones or to wherever you're getting news. As time goes on, generally, you're able to take a little bit more control of it. And it is important to get information, but that doom scrolling, that incessant looking and checking doesn't help anyone. If you can choose one or two trusted sources that you have and check them several times during the day, but allow yourself also to disconnect without feeling guilty. I think that goes a long way to reducing some of our anxiety. Then there's the whole avenue of ritual, and ritual includes things like davening, saying Tehillim, learning Mishnah, maybe creating a new Seder of learning, things that give our lives structure. And why is structure so important? Structure gives a feeling of safety in uncertain times. Routines tell our brains that there is still order, there's still safety, life continues. It kind of is an almost, it feels good. So going back to the things that you normally do, whether they're related to religious practice or not, as some of you here may not have a regular religious practice, and doing things like journaling or reading some philosophic work or meditating can all bring a sense of order and safety and continuity. Just for a few moments, just to end, I wanted to quote Viktor Frankl, who's a favorite of many of us, because he really has brought the whole notion of meaning to the forefront and understanding how important meaning is in coping. If we understand why we're here and understand the importance of the Jewish people and what this war is all about, that certainly helps us in coping, reminding ourselves what is the purpose of our existence, what is the purpose of the state of Israel, why we are here, what we are fighting for, all makes it I can't say makes it easier to cope, but it gives us a purpose. It gives us a reason. So one of the things that Viktor Frankl once said is that everything can be taken from man but one thing. The last of the human freedoms is to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. So one of the hardest things of wartime anxiety is feeling that we are helpless. But there is a difference between being powerless and being not in control. We can still choose. We can choose how we live our lives these next days and these next weeks. We can choose to be kind to ourselves. We can be kind to others. We can care for people around us, whether it be children or parents or the elderly or the infirm. We can show up and contribute to our communities. And most importantly, we can keep hope alive, because without hope, we have nothing. So we actually need to put effort and energy into our hope, reminding ourselves what we are hopeful for and hoping that the war will come to a successful close in the near future. And all I can say is that Am Yisrael Chai and Yachad Ninatzeach, you are not alone. You are responding in a deeply human way to very difficult times if you're experiencing anxiety. And I hope that you will take that from our talk today. So thank you for listening, and moving on.
Thank you very much, Dr. Naomi Baum. You mentioned four things in four major categories. I just want to review briefly some of the salient points that you make. You suggested that people speak about, particularly to their children at any age, about why Israel is in this war. You spoke about pivoting as a sign of flexibility and strength. Anxiety is not only emotional, it also projects itself very much in a physical way. Increased higher blood pressure, heart racing, loss of appetite, exhaustion. And you spoke about the value and the importance of support groups can be helpful in many forms. I want to skip to a third item that you spoke about, which is social media. And I just want to reflect personally. There are thousands and infinity amount of social media websites, everything that everyone can look at nonstop. I personally look at three that tell me about what's going on in Israel and the world, especially now. I don't look at 10. I don't look at 20. I focus on three where I feel that I get good valued information. And the second point that you made was about breathing. There is an explanation that God instilled life in Adam Rishon, the first man, by breathing into his nostril. And the sages give an explanation that God, Hashem, breathed very deeply into Adam's nostril, breathing deeply into Adam's nostril. Think about all the conversations about physical health and yoga and all the exercises that you described. It's all about breathing deeply, meditating. God breathed deeply into Adam Rishon's nostril, and that's how he gave him life. And you talked about breathing exercises in many different forms. It's how God gave life to first man and woman. Ellie Rothstein, Chief Executive Officer of Kav L'Noar, an organization that has an extensive operation in Jerusalem and in Beit Shemesh, and since October 8th, also in the south and the north and in central of Israel, throughout Israel, providing a lot of counseling and trauma services. Ellie Rothstein, thanks for joining us this evening.
Thank you so much for having me. Before I go into anything, I just wanted to thank Ohel, David, Norman, Naomi for allowing me to be part of this. It's really, truly an honor, and we really cherish the relationship with Ohel. So thank you so much. The first thing that I really was thinking about sharing was my personal challenge, because I think that my personal challenge also relates to a lot of challenges that we're all going through. Last week I was in the States for work, and Thursday afternoon I got onto a plane to go back home. I always try to be home for Shabbos. And mid-flight, 3.5, almost 4 hours into the flight, they announced that Israel attacked Iran, and that we'll be turning around. We are almost over the UK. We'll be turning around and going straight back to New York. And before talking about my wife and my children who are still in Israel, what that did for me is that the unsettling feeling of I had a plan, I thought I was in control, I was on the plane where I was supposed to be, and I ended up on the wrong side of the world. And looking at that and saying, this trip just turned into a much more expensive trip, and this trip turned into a much more stressful trip, and what am I going to do until I can get home? And can I get home? When can I get home? How am I going to get home? And that stress and that overwhelming feeling of I don't know, and I'm out of control, and I can't control anything is the most unsettling feeling for an individual. But then, for my wife and for my kids, what are they going to do? Who's going to take care of them? Who's going to help them out? What resources do they have? Who's going to support my wife if I'm not there to be with her in the bomb shelter? Who's going to be with her? And what are we going to do to take care of each other? And this struggle, I think, is a struggle that many of us, beyond just myself, are struggling with. We have children who are living in Israel We feel helpless to be able to help them or to recognize them or to give them what they need. We don't understand what they're actually going through. I'm sure we're all hearing how many times in the night they're waking up. My son mentioned to me this morning, his afternoon, that last night was a good night because he only had to go to the bomb shelter once. And he felt like, he said, the Iranians gave me a chance to sleep last night. And I think that that's actually, although maybe a little bit cynical, it's a really, really, really important point. Because yes, there are so many challenges that we're going through right now, looking at our families across the world, not knowing how to support our families, wanting to do everything to help, but also recognizing we have some wins, individual wins. I know, Norman, you were speaking about the incredible miracles that we've seen in this war from an army standpoint, but also looking at our families and ourselves and appreciating the wins that we are having. Hearing my son say that I got to sleep last night because I only had to get up once, that's just appreciating the positive within the challenges. Or my kids saying to me today, this is the best time ever because during the day, mommy takes them to the toy store and at night they get to order from whatever restaurant they want because Abba's not home. That's a win. And making these experiences, although challenging, making these into experiences that we can look back on and say how strong we were and how much we grew and how much we learned and how much we connected with each other, that in of itself creates resilience for the future as well. And I thought that my experience, feeling that and looking at that, I almost feel at some points during the day that it's more challenging for me than it is for my wife because she has all these wins all day. And I think that many of our family members, siblings, children, grandchildren who are in Israel, they're having those wins all day. Not only was I in the bomb shelter all night, but I was able to wake up to go to chakras the next day. Or not only was I in the bomb shelter all night, but I was able to go for a walk with my kids during the day and appreciate those quiet moments that I had. Those are wins that are creating tremendous resilience within the family structure. And I think appreciating those wins together with our families that are across on the other side of the world can be very, very strong. And it can also help us feel that we are in control. We may not be able to control what Iran is doing or what the Israeli army is doing, or when El Al is going to decide and who they're going to decide to bring back to Israel. But we have these wins together with our families and appreciate those wins together. That's something that can create a certain type of cohesion and resilience for the future. And then there's the flip side. Naomi, you mentioned we're all living in a certain type of anxiety right now, in which part of that is we can't sleep through the night. Or you mentioned that you hear something that sounds like a siren and perks you up. Maybe not in the most healthy way that we would want, but it's a reality. That's how we've learned to cope in the short term. But we also have to be mindful of that. Be aware. This is a trigger for me right now. I'm overwhelmed. I'm anxious. And those all come from a feeling that I'm supposed to be in control and I'm not in control, which isn't always true on either side. But being mindful of that. I'm feeling anxious right now. I'm feeling overwhelmed right now. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with being overwhelmed. There's nothing wrong with being anxious. And as we're learning and we're looking at these wins and we're looking at all the things that we're gaining resilience from throughout this challenging time, knowing that it's okay that right now I'm overwhelmed. Right now I can't sleep. I'm not going to make it through the night. Knowing that right now I'm not going to be at my optimal state. And that's okay. And then finding those pockets where you can take a minute to breathe or to rest. Again, it's a little unfair to my wife, but using my family as an example, if my wife sees that she's really worn out, it's been a long day, she's been up 4 times in the middle of the night, and the kids aren't sleeping, and she doesn't know what to do, to say to the older kids, can you watch the little ones for 45 minutes, for half an hour, so I can take a break, just so I can regain some strength, that I can gather myself up so that I can come back. And recognizing that's okay. There's absolutely nothing wrong with being mindful of the challenge that you're going through personally and understanding that that's okay that you're going through challenges. And it's okay if your challenges are different than other people's because they're also going through challenges and you are you and they're them. The other thing is this idea of normalizing the challenges, that it's okay that I've been mentioning, is that Everybody is challenged with the anxiety, the overwhelming family across the Jewish globe right now. Everybody is feeling that. Everybody's looking at everybody else to see, are they coping well? Are they not coping well? We always compare ourselves to other people. And the reality is that everybody reacts to the challenge differently. And we have to understand that reacting to challenges differently, that's part of human nature, and that's part of who we are. And understanding that I'm allowed to be reactive, understanding that I'm going to react, and the only thing that I can control is how I react and to whom and when. And if we can start looking at the things that we can control ourselves and understand that there are things out of our control, focusing on what we can control and doing better in those situations gives us more strength to work through the situations that we can't control. And then the final thing that I really wanted to talk about is that this idea of appreciation, because something that we're going to be looking at is I'm looking at my family across the world, whether it's a parent or a grandparent or a sibling. I'm looking at my family across the world, and I want to do everything I can to help and support them. Sometimes we need to ask them, what do you need? What can I do to support you? And it may be something that I never thought about. It may be something that I couldn't imagine that my family would need, and yet they do need. A simple example is we saw this at the beginning of the war, that a lot of people were sending flowers to families before Shabbos. A lot of people were saying, let me send you a cake for Shabbos. The cake isn't going to change whether or not Shabbos comes in and they're all cooked and all the kids are cleaned. But knowing that there's somebody there that's supporting me, that cares about me, even a little gesture is always very, very helpful. And that's something to think about. But here we have an opportunity, like we've all been mentioning. We live in a technological world. We're FaceTiming with our kids and families. We're talking to them on the phone. We have the news sites. We know more or less what's going on, and we can touch base, which gives us the opportunity to ask them what they need, if they know what they need, and we can share that with them, which is a very, very powerful tool. And then sharing appreciation with each other. I think that if we can start a conversation together, I appreciate this, you appreciate that, sharing with each other, we're building bridges with each other to understand how each other works and to anticipate what each other are feeling, to actually be able to take that further along and be even more connected with each other, even though we're feeling so separate. And the more connected we are, and the more connected we are with our groups, with our families, with our friends, the more we're going to be able to work through these challenges and become more and more resilient. Thank you so much for giving me the time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much to our colleague Ellie Rothstein, CEO of Kav L'Noar. I loved your expression of control your wins and share appreciation. I'll give you some examples. You think about all the issues that you're going through and the anxieties that you have, and we enumerated so many, and you have children in Israel, and your summer plans have gone awry. We've got a number of colleagues at Ohel who currently have children serving in the north and in the south, in Gaza. We have a number of board members at Ohel whose children and grandchildren are currently serving at the front lines. I have cousins in Ashkelon who have been at the front lines over the last 2 years. So in terms of sharing appreciation, controlling your wins, I speak to them, see what's going on. Or you see the face of a colleague that just spoke to their daughter or their son or their daughter-in-law in Israel, and they just went to a mamad for the third time tonight, and your son went once and he got a few hours of sleep. Someone asked on the chat, when I mentioned that I listened to only 3, who do I listen to? I listen and I read Arutz Sheva, which is a pretty pro-government site. I listen and I watch J-Post, Jerusalem Post, which is not such a pro-government site, and it gives you balance. And for those who can, depending on where you're located, an Israeli channel, whether it's I-24 or 14, if you understand Ivrit, and they also have a lot of conversation in English. So Dr. Blumenthal, let's begin with a question. We spoke about trying to control our emotion, controlling our anxiety, managing our anxiety. Dr. Baum spoke about breathing. But I have a son, I've got a daughter, and they're coming home from Israel. I have a daughter who has doctor's appointments for the ailments that she has, the medication that has to be renewed. I've got a son or a grandson who's scheduled to take the LSATs. I've got a daughter who is starting to work in camp or in a summer program. Thank you for telling me that I have to manage my anxiety and that I've got to breathe. I can't breathe right now. There's so many things going on that I can't control. When is it going to get better, Dr. Blumenthal?
I was getting anxiety hearing the question, if you noticed that I was breathing a little bit more. So there's an interesting mental mechanism that takes place. I'll give you as an example of something that we in the trauma team have to do and what occurs. And I think the same thing can happen for those facing those kind of very challenging situations. One of the hardest things we do is something called death notification. We have to go and notify someone, low Elena, that a loved one had died. And I often say, when I'm driving there, I am drowning in anxiety. I'm rehearsing in my head. I'm sweating. I'm a wreck. When I leave, I need a stiff drink. I'm a mess. When I'm there, I'm hyper-focused. When I'm doing the death notification, I'm acutely aware, or actually remotely aware, of the enormity of what I'm doing. But I'm able to, and I don't do this, there's no mechanism I do. It's a God-given capacity that I can sort of portion out the anxiety or sort of file it away, not completely, but file it away enough that I can focus on doing my job. And that's a remarkable capacity and something that we can really appreciate. And I think the same thing happens in these kind of emergent situations, that when we're on the phone with that child or when we're trying to figure out how that person's going to get this and that medication when the country is in shutdown, while we're doing that and while we're engaged in that process, but we can sort of put the anxiety aside and get very pragmatic and very focused. And I think we have to trust that capacity. We often say in trauma, and I'm sure it would be corroborated by my colleagues, the co-panelists, that coping and resilience is a norm, and that PTSD and falling apart happens, but it's the exception. And trust your coping mechanism and trust that capacity that when you're in that emergent situation, you'll be, as I said, hyper-focused and rational and pragmatic.
Ellie, you're speaking with your child, you're giving advice to someone about what are the proper words to tell a child who you're speaking to while they're in the mamad, while they're in the shelter, and the siren is going off, and they're there for the second or third time, and everyone sees and reads the news. What are some of the words that a parent or a friend can say to someone while they are in a shelter protecting themselves? And I also want to add extraordinary situations that we've read, maybe for the first time, at least for me, in which missiles that have hit directly shelters, missiles, we've had at least 2 reports of people, unfortunately, and this is scary, dying while they were in protected space because that missile hit a shelter directly. What are the words that you can say to an individual while they're in a shelter, that they're in protected space? Ellie and then Naomi, please.
It's David, it's a very hard question because I don't think that there's one general type of response to give. I mentioned my son a couple times, was 19 years old learning in yeshiva, but there's certainly a difference between my son who's 19 learning in yeshiva and his perspective on the war versus maybe my 15-year-old girl who's at home and her perspective on the war, or the potential of missiles coming close to our home, or speaking to an adult who is carrying the anxiety of the entire war on their shoulders. And I think each one of them needs a different type of response. And in the moment, that's very, very hard to do because each one is different and we're not prepared for it at all times. And I think, Norman, I think what you said is very, very powerful. In the moment, being fully present, I believe, is the correct answer. If I'm fully present and in tune with the person that I'm speaking to, then I'm going to say the right thing because I'm going to be there with them. And if I'm not fully present with them, they're going to feel it immediately and they're going to be turned off or hurt or insulted or not supported. So I think really it's not about what we say, but how we say and how we are with them.
It's not what we say, but how we say it and how we come across that we're being with them. Empathy. Dr. Baum, what are your thoughts about how to convey words or information while you're speaking to someone who's in a mamad, in a shelter?
It's a tough call. If it's your own kid, your own kid. And I think the important thing to do if it's your kid is to try to be as self-regulated as you can, not to be hysterical and not to say, oh my God, oh, I can't believe it. You need to be as calm as you can and convey that calm in the tone of your voice, in how you're talking to your child. Now, if your child is going, I don't know what to, going hysterical, you just say, I'm staying with you on the line. I'm not leaving you. I don't know if they have reception in the shelter. That's another thing. A lot of the shelters do not have reception. I'll stay with you as long as we have reception. And if we get cut off, you'll call me as soon as you get out of the shelter. I'm here and I'm here for you and I'm listening. That's all you can do. You can't make it better. It's very hard as a parent to hear this, and it's very hard not to get sucked into their anxiety. But I think it's critical, absolutely critical, for us to, if we are in any way able to help our children who are experiencing extremely high levels of anxiety, it's critical for us to say, okay, I'm here in New York now, and my job is to stay calm and to stay collected and to be with my child and to hear them. There's not a whole lot I can do from this end, but that's what I can do.
Dr. Blumenthal, I've heard you say over your various lectures that it's important for parents or anyone not to promise children or in any circumstances things that they can't deliver. You shouldn't promise everything will be okay, don't worry. That it's hard to say to someone, don't worry, and it's hard to say to someone everything will be okay in the middle of a frantic situation. We're having a question from someone in Israel right now. You've done a lot of work at different ages with children, as have Dr. Baum and Ellie Rothstein, Dr. Blumenthal. Someone from Israel is asking us a question. I have a 4, 5, 6-year-old. I need to explain to them what Iran is and what Hamas is. My 4-year-old has a more limited understanding. My 6-year-old has a better understanding. How do I explain this war to my 4-year-old, Dr. Blumenthal?
So to go back to what you referenced in terms of that we can't always promise a positive outcome. Sometimes we can. If a child comes running into our bedroom and says that they had a dream that the boogeyman is after them, we can assure them that there is no boogeyman. But in circumstances like this, where we can't promise a positive outcome, what we do is we shift to what we are doing. And I think a very important message to children who are scared, and if it were, and it's we're talking about at a time when there are missile attacks and where there is a danger, is to remind them of our and the country's resilience, that we have an Iron Dome, that we have a wonderful, great army, that we are strong, and that we believe in Hashem, draw upon the assistance that we have, and instead of promising that there'll be some sort of positive outcome. You mentioned ages 4, 5, and 6. Those are pretty proximate ages. But the 4-year-old does not really have a full understanding of why people are doing this or what's really going on. And I think I would echo what Naomi said, which is you just assure them of your continued presence, that we are here and we're in this together. 6-year-olds already, and that's true of elementary school age children in general, tend to see the world in a very polarized way, or a binary kind of way, in that there's good guys and bad guys. There's no nuance. So to them, the idea that there are evil people and bad people who wish us harm and good people who are fighting against them fits very naturally into their thinking. And so therefore, it's easier for them to sort of, even if it's not a pleasant thought, but to sort of fit it into the schema of how their brain thinks, which is that the world is occupied by good people and bad people. And there are bad people that wish us harm. Unfortunately, we live in a time when we can, to a large extent, disarm them and defeat them. And this is really a blessing. I'm a child of Holocaust survivors, as is Naomi, and as is David. So we have memories as children about hearing about times when we didn't have those kind of resources, and we didn't have that capacity to fight back. So it's something that we can again marshal to help our children and ourselves cope with these dangers.
We're going to go with one or two more questions conversation. I want to remind everyone that on Ohel website, ohelfamily.org, there are many resources that are authored by Dr. Blumenthal and at City Rider and Dr. Baum and colleagues that speak to this issue. And there are also resources on Kav L'Noar that people can look and speak to this issue. Also, I want to ask everyone, after this conversation is over, to please take 2 additional minutes, literally. An evaluation will pop up on your screen and ask you to please respond to it briefly. Dr. Baum, we spent so much time talking about trauma and anxiety and resilience, and the war that's going on is creating trauma, and the data statistics that are coming out of Israel, 55% of the kids, 40% of the population, 75% of the adolescents will experience anxiety. The data is just profound. How do I know, if I'm in the midst of all this, Dr. Baum, that I'm not experiencing severe anxiety, that I'm not experiencing trauma, that I am not someone that's going to have post-traumatic stress? How do I check myself, Dr. Baum?
I don't know that there's necessarily a way to check yourself. I think a lot of people, I would say in Israel today, if I had to guess, the large majority of the population are experiencing what we call post-traumatic symptoms. They're not post-traumatic, they're peri-traumatic, because it's happening right now. They're having high levels of anxiety. They're having trouble sleeping. They may be having, their bodies are very much on edge. That is a normal response, and that's what we have to remember. When the dust settles, hopefully most of the people will return to normal functioning. If you find that you are having trouble returning to normal functioning after a few weeks, I think it's time to get some help. And the help doesn't mean that you're going to be in long-term therapy forever and ever. It may be some very short-term focused help. For people who are experiencing right now extremely high levels of anxiety, and there are people like that, there is help available. There are resilience centers all over Israel that provide help. All of the health funds are providing help. There are plenty of private providers who are providing help. So you can get, if your levels of anxiety are so high that they're paralyzing right now, I would say do not wait and go get some help. But for the most part, most of the people, I've been talking to my kids and to my grandkids. Just today, I talked to several of my 7 and 8-year-old grandchildren, how are you doing? And I asked them, how are you doing? I really spoke straight. I said, are you afraid? Is it scary? No, we're okay. It's kind of annoying. That's what they told me. This is annoying. They didn't seem frightened. And their parents haven't said that they're particularly frightened. Now, most of them, they don't live in the middle of Tel Aviv, so there haven't been bombs directly in the neighborhood. But they've been running to bomb shelters. So also, I think it depends on your proximity to where there has been real destruction. The closer you are to sites where bombs have fallen, I would imagine that the probability of developing post-traumatic distress or PTSD is higher. But I think what we have to focus on right now during this war is that anxiety is normal. Symptoms are normal. We have to be caring to ourselves and caring to other people and understanding of that, and not freak out if we have trouble sleeping at night, and not freak out if we're feeling a little tense and tight, and not worry if we're jumpy. Think about what we can do to help ourselves, notice it, and understand that these are the reactions to these very unusual times. And then when the dust settles, let's see how we're doing.
I hope this conversation was helpful to just one individual. I always speak in terms of one. We only have to help one individual on this conversation. We only have to help one family. We only have had to give a suggestion to one person who can speak to their son or daughter in Israel or to themselves. I would like to suggest to those who are in Israel right now and who can get back for at least 2 days, 3 days, or a week, consider giving blood. I would like to suggest that those who are in Israel right now and can't get back for 2 or 3 days or a week, to go to one of the hospitals and just walk into the lobby or to admitting or to volunteers and say, what can I do for the next 6 hours? What can I do for the next 2 days? And of course, just to keep yourself totally safe. And maybe that'll distract you. Distracting you from some of your own anxiety, from some of your own tension, may in fact help you breathe a little bit. We know that there are just unimaginable, I would say, trauma, physical, emotional, financial, national. 24 people have been killed. Hundreds have been injured and hospitalized. The physical destruction, economic destruction is massive. At the same time, while you're there, you're in the midst of a war, an existential war that hopefully will end very soon with tremendous victory to Am Yisrael, to the state of Israel. Everyone, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Dr. Norman Blumenthal, Dr. Naomi Baum, Ellie Rothstein, Naomi, Ellie, get home to Israel safe. Everyone's children and family members should come back to America safe. And everyone listening to this webinar should make plans to go to Israel to visit and be a tourist over there. And as Rabbi Browerwein said several decades ago, rent in Florida, buy in Israel. Everyone, have a very special evening. Good night, and thank you for joining us.